Greetings, today is May 20th, 2024, and my name is Shelby Steele. The title of this slideshow is Applied Risk Assessment Strategies for Mentees, and the purpose of this presentation is to acquaint a group of new employees with some framework methods we use for application of risk assessment models. This helps us to determine possible risks faced with regard to ecological, occupational, and human health. The class that assigned this project is called ENV 420, Environmental Risk Assessment, with the University of Phoenix, and the instructor's name is Kelly Heflin. Let's get started. To give a brief overview of the following presentation, there will be 13 slides beginning after this one, making 15 slides total. For slide 3, I will go over my chosen NPL site and the related cleanup activities on slide 4. For slide 5, we talk about what a human health risk assessment is and go into detail about the chronological steps on slides 6 through 10, which include the planning stage, hazard identification step, dose response assessment step, exposure assessment step, and risk characterization step. On slide 11, we introduced the ecological assessment model and then recommended practices for safety and health programs on slide 12. I will sum up the presentation on the conclusion slide number 13 and cite references on slide 14. The last but not least slide, number 15, I give my gratitude for your attention to this matter. To begin putting together this presentation for you, I visited the National Priorities List website by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. I chose the state of Iowa and found 13 sites listed for that state. Fairfield Coal Gasification Plant, located in Jefferson County at 107 South 7th Street. In the city of Fairfield is the one that interested me the most. It is classified as an NPL site, which means it's on the Superfund National Priorities List of the United States federal government, starting in 1990. It is in Region 7, and its hazard ranking system score is 38.05. According to the site narrative link provided, the Fairfield Coal Gasification Plant produces a commercial fuel substitute for coal. Iowa Electric and Power Company, ielp, has owned the site since the year 1878, and the site has served as a maintenance garage and electrical substation since the year 1950. It is 1.3 acres and surrounded by several residential zones. The main wastes associated with the coal gasification are polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs abbreviated. They are found in coal tar and cyanide salts. Some of the coal tar was sold and some was buried in on-site pits. Disposal methods for iron cyanide waste are not known, but it may also have been dumped on site. In 1985, 6 different PAHs were detected in groundwater near the site, including benzene, anthracene, pyrene, and benzoapyrene. The contamination was confirmed in 1987 by the EPA. In an effort to monitor the spread of contamination, ielp took quarterly samples of the drinking water from private wells within 3 miles of the site that an estimated 1,100 people consume. 2.9 miles downslope is a stream called Cedar Creek that is used for recreational activities. The ielp and the EPA are working together to handle the situation. What has been done to clean up the site? In April 1989, the respondents and the EPA entered into an administrative settlement agreement and order on consent to conduct a remedial investigation, feasible study, and construct and operate an interim groundwater extraction and treatment system to contain the migration of the groundwater contamination. The EPA issued a record of decision in 1990, selecting the remedial action to address contamination associated with the site. Major components of the selected remedy included off-site incineration of the coal tar source areas, as well as the contaminated soil. the treatment of contaminated groundwater by filtration, polymer injection and settling, and carbon absorption systems, and the in situ treatment of coal gas migration areas involving the injection of nutrients into the aquifer to stimulate biological degradation. The interim groundwater extraction and treatment system was constructed in 1989 and approved in 1993 after modification as a permanent groundwater treatment system. In 2021, a focused feasibility study, or FS, was initiated to evaluate additional remedial alternatives to address the remaining DNAPL, or dense non-aqueous phase liquid, because the groundwater contaminants exceeded the cleanup levels selected in the 1990 Record of Decision. The feasibility study will support a decision document modification. The 6th 5-year review for the site was signed on June 14, 2022. It determined the remedy at the site currently protects human health and the environment in the short term. A human health risk assessment is the process to estimate the nature and probability of adverse health effects in humans who may be exposed to chemicals in contaminated environmental media now or in the future. After the initial planning stage, a human health risk assessment includes 4 steps, which are hazard identification, dose response assessment, exposure assessment, and risk characterization. For the human health risk assessment planning stage, the Environmental Protection Agency begins an ecological risk assessment by planning the overall approach with dialogue between the risk managers, risk assessors, and other interested parties or stakeholders. Members of the team then identify risk management goals and options, identify the natural resources of concern, reach an agreement on scope and complexity of the assessment, and decide on team member roles. In the first step of the process for human health risk assessments, the assessors examine whether a stressor has the potential to cause harm to humans and/or ecological systems. If so, they determine under what circumstances it would be hazardous. In the dose response assessment step, assessors gather information to determine the numerical relationship between exposure and effects. This is where we include mathematics. For example, how long was the exposure? How large was the dose? Etc. These questions can help determine possible outcomes for toxicity. Once the first 2 steps have been identified, the assessors examine what is known about the frequency, timing, and levels of contact with the stressor. This 3rd step is known as the exposure assessment step. Again, the questions I suggested on the previous slide are similarly taken into consideration for this step as well. Risk characterization includes 2 major components, risk estimation and risk description. For risk estimation, it compares the estimated or measured exposure level for each stressor and plant or animal population, community or ecosystem of concern, and the data on expected effects for that group for the exposure level. Risk description provides information that is important for interpreting the risk results. This includes whether harmful effects are expected on the plants and animals of concern. Relevant qualitative comparisons and how uncertainties, such as data gaps and natural variation, might affect the assessment. An ecological risk assessment model consists of 3 different phases: problem formulation, analysis, and risk characterization. With problem formulation, the assessor gathers information to determine which plants and animals are in need of protection. Based on the planning results, they specify the scope of the assessment in time and space, the environmental stressors of concern, the endpoints to be evaluated, and which measures, models, and types of data will be used to assess barriers or risks to those endpoints. In the exposure assessment under analysis phase, the assessor determines which plants and animals are likely to be exposed to each environmental stressor. The United States Department of Labor has a branch called OSHA, which means Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The model laid out here can be found on their public website under Safety Management, Hazard Identification and Assessment. There are 6 steps in this model, which include number 1, collecting existing information about workplace hazards. Number 2, inspect workplace for safety hazards. Number 3, identify health hazards. Number 4, conduct incident investigations. Number 5, identify hazards associated with emergency and non-routine situations. And 6, characterize the nature of identified hazards. Identify the interim control measures, and prioritize the hazards for control. On this Applied Risk Assessment Strategies slideshow, we went over different models for assessing risk to human health in the ecosystem. I first gave a case study and then broke down each step for the 3 different models I presented, such as the Human Health Assessment Model, the Ecological Assessment Model, and recommended practices for the workplace. Each employee can come back to this for reference until it is fully understood and implemented for optimal work performance. Here we give credit where credit is due. On the final source citations page, I used 4 references to support me when creating this presentation, including the EPA's National Priorities List sites, and the Human Health Risk Assessment and the Ecological Risk Assessment, all from the US EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency. The Recommended Practices for Safety and Health Programs reference is from the OSHA website. OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Thanks for watching.